My aunt secretly installed cameras in my apartment. What started as an act of unsettling intrusion soon revealed a truth so shocking, it turned my entire world upside down. I was living a normal life, or so I thought, until those hidden eyes showed me something I could never unsee, a betrayal that was closer than I ever imagined, and a secret that would forever change the dynamics of my family. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Alara Vance, and just 6 months ago, my life felt relatively stable. Not perfect, mind you, but good enough. At 31, I was working part-time as a graphic designer, raising my 2 wonderful children, Leo and Maya, with my husband Liam in our quiet apartment in the heart of the city. We'd been married for a decade, together for 12 years, and despite the occasional rough patch, I genuinely believed our bond was solid. I trusted him, I believed in our shared future, but as it turned out, I believed a lot of things that were about to be shattered. The whole nightmare began on a Tuesday morning in early May. I remember it vividly because it was the day after our building's annual spring social, and I was still finding glitter in Maya's hair from her enthusiastic participation. Liam had already left for his job as an architect at Sterling Designs, where he'd been for the past 8 years. The kids were getting ready for school, and I was savoring a rare moment of peace with my coffee when I heard the familiar jingle of my Aunt Beatrice's keys at my front door. Aunt Beatrice Dubois, Liam's older sister by 3 years, had been a constant presence in our lives since we'd moved into this building 5 years ago. She was a successful interior designer, always impeccably dressed, always perfectly coiffed, even at 8 in the morning. She had this way of sweeping into my apartment as if she owned it, a habit that always slightly annoyed me, but which Liam simply dismissed as just Beatrice being family. That morning, she breezed through our front door without knocking, as usual, her expensive heels clicking against my polished concrete floors. "Alara, darling, we need to talk," she announced, setting her designer handbag on my kitchen island with a dramatic sigh. Her voice carried that particular tone she used when she was about to deliver what she considered important news, the same tone she'd used to tell me my new artwork was too abstract, or that Leo might benefit from private tutoring because his school wasn't cultivating his full potential. I looked up from my coffee, my guard already rising. "What's wrong, Aunt Beatrice?" She perched on the edge of one of my kitchen stools, crossing her perfectly manicured legs and leaning forward with an expression of manufactured concern. "It's about Marcus Thorne, your neighbor." Marcus had moved into the apartment next door about 6 months earlier after his divorce was finalized. He was a kind, quiet, and polite software engineer, the kind of neighbor who would hold the elevator door open for you and offer to help with groceries if your hands were full. He was also undeniably attractive in that intelligent, understated way that made some of the other residents in our building subtly check him out in the lobby. "What about Marcus?" I asked, a knot of unease already forming in my stomach about where this conversation was heading. Aunt Beatrice's eyes widened with feigned sympathy. "Oh, sweetie, I hate to be the one to tell you this, but people are talking. At the building's social last night, several of the women mentioned they've seen you and Marcus spending quite a bit of time together. Clara Jenkins said she saw you two talking by the mailboxes for over an hour last week, and Eleanor Vance mentioned he helped you with your groceries last Sunday." I stared at her, completely bewildered. "Aunt Beatrice, we're neighbors. Of course, we talk sometimes. And yes, he helped me with groceries because I was juggling 2 bags of cat food and trying to unlock the door while Maya was having a meltdown about not being able to find her favorite unicorn headband. It's called being neighborly." But Aunt Beatrice was shaking her head, her expression growing more serious. "Alara, I'm not judging you. I understand that being married to someone who travels for work can be lonely. Liam's been putting in so many extra hours lately with all those new building projects. But honey, appearances matter. And the way You two look at each other, the way you light up when you see him. It's becoming obvious to everyone. Obvious? The word came out sharper than I'd intended. What exactly do you think is obvious? That you're developing feelings for him, Aunt Beatrice said softly, reaching across to pat my hand in a gesture that felt more condescending than comforting. Maybe nothing has happened yet, but Alara, you're playing with fire, and I love you too much to watch you destroy your marriage over some rebound tech guy. I jerked my hand away from hers. Rebound tech guy? Aunt Beatrice, I'm not developing feelings for anyone. Marcus is a nice neighbor who occasionally helps me carry heavy things. That is literally the extent of our relationship. I'm sure that's what you tell yourself, she said, her voice taking on that patient tone people use when they think you're deluding yourself. But sweetie, I've seen how you dress when you know he might be outside. The extra attention to your appearance, the way you find excuses to be in the hallway when he's coming home from work. This was getting ridiculous. I dress the same way I always dress, and I'm in the hallway because I have children who use the elevator and a door that needs locking. This is insane, Aunt Beatrice. She stood up, smoothing down her designer dress. Look, I'm not here to argue with you. I'm here because I care about my brother and my niece and nephew. They deserve a stable home, and Liam deserves a wife who's committed to their marriage, not fantasizing about the man next door. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. Get out, I said quietly. Alara, I'm only trying to help. Get out of my apartment, Aunt Beatrice. She gathered her purse, her expression hardening. I hope you'll think about what I've said, and I hope you'll consider what's best for your family before it's too late. After she left, I sank onto a kitchen stool, trying to process what had just happened. The entire conversation felt surreal, like I'd been accused of a crime I didn't even know existed. I thought about my interactions with Marcus, trying to see them through Aunt Beatrice's apparently twisted lens. Yes, we'd talked by the mailboxes. We were neighbors with children close in age. His daughter, Chloe, was in Maya's grade, at school. Yes, he'd helped me with groceries. Yes, I probably did smile when I saw him, the same way I smiled at all our neighbors because I was raised to be polite and friendly. But romantic feelings? An affair? The suggestion was so far from reality that I would have laughed if it hadn't been so hurtful. I'd been with Liam since I was 19 years old. He was the only man I'd ever been serious about, the father of my children, my partner in everything that mattered. The idea that I would jeopardize all of that for a neighbor I barely knew was not just wrong, it was insulting. I tried to push the conversation out of my mind, focusing instead on getting Maya and Leo ready for school and preparing for my afternoon design shift. But Aunt Beatrice's words kept echoing in my head, particularly her claim that other people were talking. I'd lived in this apartment building for 5 years. These women had been to my children's birthday parties, had shared elevator, rides and play dates, and countless casual conversations. The thought that they were now gossiping about me, creating some fictional drama out of simple neighborly interactions, made me feel sick. That afternoon at work, I found myself confiding in my friend and colleague Sarah Davies. During our break, Sarah had been my anchor since art school, the kind of friend who would tell you when you had paint on your cheek and who'd drive across town at midnight if you needed her. She listened to the whole story without interrupting, her expression growing more incredulous with each detail. Wait, let me get this straight, she said when I finished. Aunt Beatrice, who has never liked you and has always been weirdly possessive of Liam, is now claiming that you're having an emotional affair with your neighbor because you had a conversation by the mailboxes? That's pretty much it, I said, rubbing my temples where a headache was starting to form. And she's basing this on what? The testimony of a bunch of bored apartment dwellers who probably watch too many reality shows? According to her, it's obvious to everyone. The way I look at him, the way I dress when I think he might be outside. Sarah snorted. Alara, I've known you for 12 years. You dress exactly the same whether you're going to the grocery store or the school pickup line, and you look at everyone the same way, because you're genuinely nice to people. If that's flirting, then you've been having affairs with the building superintendent, the delivery driver, and half the parents at your kid's school. Her words were reassuring, but I couldn't shake the anxiety that had settled in my chest. What if Liam believes her? What if he starts seeing innocent interactions as something more? Then Liam's an idiot, Sarah said bluntly. But Alara, you know your husband better than that. He's not going to throw away 10 years of marriage because his sister has an overactive imagination and too much time on her hands. I wanted to believe her, but there was something about Aunt Beatrice's confidence, her certainty that she was right, and I was wrong, that left me feeling unsettled. She'd always had a way of getting into Liam's head, of presenting her opinions as facts, and making him question his own judgment. It was one of the things about their relationship that had always bothered me, though I'd learned to pick my battles over the years. When I got home from work at 7 the next morning, Liam was already up, sitting at the kitchen island with his laptop and a cup of coffee. He looked up when I walked in, and I thought I saw something different in his expression. Not accusatory exactly, but more guarded than usual. "How was work?" he asked, the same question he'd asked every morning for years. But somehow, it felt loaded. "Busy afternoon," I replied, pouring myself coffee and trying to read his mood. 2 new client projects and a last-minute design revision. Marcus's firm was actually involved in one of the new projects, he mentioned casually. My head snapped up at the mention of Marcus's name, and I immediately regretted bringing him up. "You talked to him?" "Yes. He was at the planning meeting. Why?" Liam closed his laptop and leaned back in his stool, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. "Aunt Beatrice stopped by yesterday. She's concerned about you." My heart sank. Concerned about me? How? "She thinks you might be getting too close to our neighbor. She said people are starting to talk." I set down my coffee cup carefully, trying to keep my voice level. "And what do you think?" There was a pause that lasted too long, a hesitation that told me everything I needed to know. "I think Aunt Beatrice loves our family and wouldn't say something like that unless she was genuinely worried." "That's not what I asked you, Liam. I asked what you think." He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized as his tell when he was uncomfortable. "I think maybe we should be more careful about appearances. This is a small building, and people do talk." "Appearances of what exactly? Being friendly to our neighbors? Accepting help when someone offers it? Having normal human interactions with the people who live around us?" "Alara, don't make this into something bigger than it is. I'm just saying maybe we should be more aware of how things look." But it was already bigger than that, and we both knew it. The fact that he'd taken Aunt Beatrice's word over mine, that he'd entertained even for a moment the possibility that I might be having an inappropriate relationship with Marcus, felt like a betrayal of everything we'd built together. The fact that he was now asking me to change my behavior, to become suspicious and secretive about innocent interactions, felt like the beginning of the end of something I'd thought was unbreakable. "I need to get some sleep," I said, too tired and hurt to continue the conversation. "We can talk about this later." But as I lay in bed that morning, staring at the ceiling and listening to Liam getting ready for work, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in our marriage. Aunt Beatrice had planted a seed of doubt, and I could already see it taking root in Liam's mind, changing the way he looked at me, the way he interpreted my actions. I thought about Marcus, probably going about his normal day, completely unaware, that he'd become an unwitting player in some twisted drama orchestrated by my sister-in-law. I thought about the casual conversations we'd had, the mundane interactions that Aunt Beatrice had somehow transformed into evidence of an affair that existed only in her imagination. I thought about the other residents, people I'd considered friends, apparently dissecting my every move and finding sinister meaning in the most innocent gestures. Most of all, I thought about Liam, the man I'd loved for over a decade, and how easily he'd been convinced to doubt me. Aunt Beatrice had always been jealous of our relationship, always looking for ways to insert herself between us. But this felt different. This felt calculated and cruel in a way that suggested she wasn't just meddling for the sake of meddling. This felt like she had an agenda, though I couldn't imagine what it might be. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I had no idea that within a matter of months I would discover exactly what Aunt Beatrice's agenda was. I had no idea that her accusations against me were nothing but projection, a smokescreen to hide her own guilty behavior. I had no idea that the security cameras Liam had insisted we install for our family's safety would ultimately expose the truth about who was really betraying our marriage. All I knew was that my life had suddenly become a minefield where every smile, every conversation, every moment of basic human kindness was being scrutinized and twisted into something ugly. All I knew was that the woman I'd trusted as family had turned my own husband against me, and I had no idea how to fight back against accusations that were so baseless they bordered on absurd. The apartment building that had felt like a haven for our growing family now felt hostile and unwelcoming. The marriage that had been my anchor for over a decade suddenly felt fragile and uncertain. And the sister-in-law who'd pretended to love me like family had revealed herself to be something else entirely. If someone had told me then that this was just the beginning, that Aunt Beatrice's campaign against me would escalate far beyond idle gossip and family drama, I wouldn't have believed them. If someone had told me that I would soon have proof of her incredible hypocrisy, evidence so damning it would turn the tables completely, I would have thought they were crazy. But sometimes the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep. Someone tries to bury it. Sometimes the very technology meant to protect us ends up exposing the people we should have been protecting ourselves from all along. And sometimes the person pointing the finger is the one with the most to hide. The weeks following Aunt Beatrice's accusations felt like living in a fishbowl where every movement was being watched and analyzed. Liam had grown distant and suspicious. His usual easy affection replaced by a cold formality that made me feel like a stranger in my own home. He started coming home later from work, claiming he had extra paperwork to catch up on. And when he was home, he spent most of his time on his laptop or watching television, avoiding conversation beyond the necessities of daily life with 2 children. The change in our building dynamics was equally unsettling. Women who had previously chatted easily with me in the lobby now offered tight smiles and hurried conversations. The building book club invitations stopped coming. Not that I'd attended regularly anyway, but the exclusion stung nonetheless. I began to notice how conversations would halt when I approached groups of residents, how eyes would follow me when I was in the communal laundry room, how whispers seemed to trail in my wake during community gatherings. Marcus Thorne, completely oblivious to the drama swirling around him, continued to be his usual friendly self. He'd wave when he saw me, offer to help with heavy bags, and make small talk about the weather or our children's school activities. Each interaction now felt loaded with potential misinterpretation, and I found myself becoming awkward and stilted in my responses, which probably only fed the gossip mill further. 3 weeks after Aunt Beatrice's kitchen confrontation, I was working a particularly difficult design shift when my phone buzzed with a text from Liam. "Need to talk when you get home. Important." The message, sent at 2 a.m, filled me with dread. Liam was an early sleeper, usually in bed by 10:30, so for him to be awake and texting in the middle of the night suggested something serious had happened. I spent the rest of my shift distracted, running through possibilities in my mind. Had something happened to one of the children? Were his parents okay? Had Aunt Beatrice escalated her campaign somehow? By the time I clocked out at 7, my anxiety was at a fever pitch. I found Liam in the kitchen, still in his pajamas, despite the fact that he should have been getting ready for work. His laptop was open on the island, and his expression was grave. The children had apparently already left for school, probably walked by our neighbor, Mrs. Albright, who sometimes helped when our schedules conflicted. "Sit down, Alara." he said without preamble, his voice carrying a formality that made my stomach drop. I remained standing, crossing my arms defensively. "What's going on, Liam?" He turned his laptop toward me, and I saw what appeared to be a social media page open on the screen. "Aunt Beatrice showed me this last night." I leaned closer, to look at the screen and felt the blood drain from my face. It was Marcus Thorne's social media page, and prominently displayed was a photo I recognized immediately. It had been taken at our building's spring social 3 weeks earlier, the same party after which Aunt Beatrice had started her whisper campaign. In the photo, Marcus and I were standing together near the food table, both of us laughing at something off camera. His hand was resting lightly on my shoulder, and we were standing closer together than I remembered. "This was posted 2 days after the party," Liam said, his voice carefully controlled. "Look at the caption." I read the words beneath the photo with growing horror. "Great neighbors make all the difference. Thanks for making a newcomer. Feel so welcome, Ilara." Taken in context with Aunt Beatrice's accusations, I could see how the photo and caption might look suspicious to someone predisposed to see guilt where none existed, but I remembered the moment clearly. Marcus had been telling a story about his daughter's first week at her new school, and I'd been laughing at her innocent misunderstanding of the lunch line procedures. Some other neighbor had offered to take a photo of the new guy with his welcoming committee, and we'd posed briefly before moving on to other conversations. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Liam, this is completely innocent," I said, hearing the desperation creeping into my voice. "It was just a casual photo at a neighborhood party. There were 50 other people there." "Were there?" he asked quietly. "Because Aunt Beatrice says you and Marcus spent most of the evening together, that you barely spoke to anyone else, that you were acting like a couple." I stared at him, speechless. The accusations had escalated far beyond what Aunt Beatrice had initially suggested, and I realized that she'd been building a case against me, piece by piece, gathering evidence and testimonies from other neighbors who had apparently been all too willing to contribute to the narrative she was constructing. "That's not true, Liam. I talked to lots of people that night. I helped serve food. I watched the kids' talent show. I spent time with Sarah and her husband when they stopped by. Marcus and I had maybe 3 brief conversations the entire evening. But you were photographed together looking happy, looking intimate." The word intimate hung in the air between us like an accusation. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to make him see how ridiculous this all was. Instead, I forced myself to speak calmly. "We were standing near each other at a community event, and someone took a photo. If that's intimate, then I've been intimate with half the building, including the superintendent who posed with everyone at the 4th of July barbecue last year." Liam closed the laptop with a sharp snap. "This isn't a joke, Ilara. My sister is concerned about our marriage. Other neighbors are talking, and now there's photographic evidence of you and Marcus looking very comfortable together." "Photographic evidence of what, exactly? Of me being friendly at a neighborhood party? Of me smiling and talking to people like a normal human being? Of you having an inappropriate relationship with another man?" The words hit me like a slap. After 10 years of marriage, countless shared experiences, 2 children together, and a lifetime of love and commitment, my husband was choosing to believe the worst about me based on a neighborhood photo and his sister's toxic gossip. "I can't believe you actually think I'm having an affair," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what to think anymore," Liam replied, and there was something in his tone that suggested he'd already made up his mind, despite his words. We were interrupted by the sound of the front door opening and Aunt Beatrice's voice calling out cheerfully, "Hello, family." She appeared in the kitchen doorway moments later, impeccably dressed as always, carrying a bakery box that she sat on the counter with a flourish. "I brought croissants from that new French place downtown," she announced, then seemed to notice the tension in the room. "Oh, am I interrupting something?" Actually, yes, I said firmly. Liam and I are having a private conversation. Aunt Beatrice's eyes widened with feigned innocence. Of course, I'll just leave these here for later. But she made no move to leave, instead leaning against the counter and fixing me with a look of sympathetic concern. Alara, sweetie, you look upset. Is everything okay? Liam answered before I could. I showed her the social media photo. Oh. Aunt Beatrice's expression shifted to something that might have been satisfaction masked as regret. I was hoping you two could work this out without having to see the evidence. But I suppose it's better to have everything out in the open. Evidence of what? I snapped. Evidence that I attended a neighborhood party and was friendly to people? Evidence that you're developing an inappropriate attachment to a man who isn't your husband, Aunt Beatrice replied smoothly. Ilara, honey, I understand that you might not see it clearly because you're emotionally involved, but to everyone else, it's becoming obvious. To everyone else, or to you and whatever neighbors you've convinced to support your delusion? Aunt Beatrice's mask slipped slightly, revealing a flash of something harder underneath. My delusion? Alara, I have multiple witnesses who saw how you behaved at that party. Clara Jenkins said, you and Marcus were practically attached, at the hip. Eleanor Vance mentioned that you seemed to light up whenever he appeared. Even sweet Mrs. Albright commented that she'd never seen you so animated with any neighbor before. Each name she dropped felt like another nail in a coffin I hadn't even known was being built for me. These were women I'd considered friends, people I'd trusted with my children, neighbors I'd helped when they needed support. The idea that they'd been analyzing my behavior and finding it wanting was devastating. And what exactly did these witnesses see that was so scandalous? I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Did they see me kiss? Him? Hold his hand? Sneak off somewhere private with him? Or did they see me have normal conversations with a neighbor at a community event? They saw a married woman acting inappropriately interested in a man who isn't her husband, Aunt Beatrice replied, her voice taking on that patient tone she used when she thought someone was being deliberately obtuse. They saw you seeking him out, laughing at everything he said, touching his arm when you talked, standing too close. I looked at Liam, searching his face for some sign that he recognized how absurd this was becoming. Liam, you were at that party too. Did you see me doing any of those things? He was quiet for a long moment, his expression troubled. I was talking business with some of the other guys most of the night. I wasn't really paying attention to what you were doing. His admissions stung more than any direct accusation could have. My husband of 10 years had been so disinterested in my activities at a neighborhood party that he hadn't even noticed who I was talking to or how I was behaving. Yet, he was perfectly willing to accept his sister's version of events and the testimony of neighbors who apparently had nothing better to do than monitor my social interactions. This is insane, I said, grabbing my purse from the counter. I'm going upstairs to shower and sleep. When I wake up, I hope you'll have come to your senses. Where are you going? Aunt Beatrice called after me as I headed for the stairs. To bed, I replied without turning around. Some of us have jobs that require us to work nights and sleep during the day. Alara. Liam's voice stopped me at the bottom of the stairs. We need to finish this conversation. No, Liam, we don't, because there's nothing to finish. There's no affair. There's no inappropriate relationship. There's nothing happening except your sister stirring up trouble where none exists. And until you're ready to believe your wife over neighborhood gossip, there's nothing more to say. I climbed the stairs, feeling like I was walking through quicksand, each step heavier than the last. Behind me, I could hear Aunt Beatrice's voice, softer now but still audible, undoubtedly continuing to poison Liam's mind against me. I closed our bedroom door and leaned against it, finally allowing the tears I'd been holding back to fall. The woman I'd trusted as family was systematically destroying my marriage with lies and manipulation. My husband was choosing to believe her over me. My neighbors were apparently spending their free time analyzing my behavior and finding it suspicious. And Marcus Thorne, the innocent catalyst for this entire nightmare, probably had no idea that his simple act of posting a friendly photo had been twisted into evidence of an affair. I took a hot shower, trying to wash away the feeling of being dirty that had settled over me since this whole ordeal began. As the water ran over me, I thought about the photo Liam had shown me, trying to remember exactly what had been happening when it was taken. Marcus had been telling me about his daughter's adjustment to her new school, and I'd been sharing some tips about helping children navigate social situations, drawing on my experience as both a mother and a former childcare worker. It had been a normal neighborly conversation, the kind I'd had hundreds of times with dozens of different people, but Aunt Beatrice had turned it into something sinister, and apparently, I wasn't the first woman she'd targeted with this kind of campaign. I remember Liam mentioning years ago that Aunt Beatrice had caused problems in their cousin's marriage by suggesting his wife was too friendly with her yoga instructor. At the time, I'd thought it was just Aunt Beatrice being overly protective of family. But now I wondered if there was a pattern of behavior I'd been too naive to recognize. When I finally fell asleep, my dreams were filled with images of being on trial for crimes I hadn't committed, surrounded by neighbors pointing accusatory fingers, while Aunt Beatrice sat in the witness stand, calmly reciting a list of my supposed transgressions. I woke up feeling more exhausted than when I'd gone to bed, my anxiety manifesting in physical symptoms that made it hard to breathe. The apartment was quiet when I emerged from our bedroom around 4 in the afternoon. Liam was still at work, and the children wouldn't be home from their after-school program for another hour. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen island staring out the window at Marcus's apartment building across the courtyard, trying to figure out how my life had gone so completely off the rails. That's when I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. Aunt Beatrice's car was in Marcus's parking spot, not parked on the street as it would be if she were visiting our apartment, but actually in his designated spot, as if she belonged there. I checked the time and confirmed that it was the middle of a weekday afternoon when Marcus should have been at work, and Aunt Beatrice should have been showing homes to clients. I watched for several minutes, telling myself there must be an innocent explanation. Maybe she was conducting some kind of real estate business with him. Maybe she was checking on his apartment for some reason. Maybe she'd stopped by to drop something off and he wasn't even home. But as I continued to watch, I saw movement through his living room window. 2 figures moving together in a way that didn't look like a business meeting or a casual, neighborly visit. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone, suddenly desperate to document what I was seeing. But before I could even open the camera app, Aunt Beatrice's distinctive silhouette appeared at Marcus's front window, and she was clearly not alone. The irony was so bitter, it made me physically sick. The woman who had spent weeks accusing me of having an inappropriate relationship with Marcus Thorne was apparently having one herself. The woman who had convinced my husband to doubt my fidelity was cheating on her own boyfriend of 2 years, a successful interior designer named Daniel, whom she'd introduced to our family as someone she was serious about. I sat frozen at my kitchen island, watching the apartment across the courtyard and trying to process what I was seeing. Aunt Beatrice had orchestrated an elaborate campaign to destroy my marriage based on accusations that were not only false, but were actually true about herself. She'd enlisted neighbors as witnesses, manipulated evidence, and convinced my husband to question 10 years of love and trust, all while engaging in the very behavior she'd accused me of. My phone rang, startling me so badly I nearly dropped it. Sarah's name appeared on the screen, and I answered on the second ring, my voice coming out as barely more than a whisper. "Alara, are you okay? You sound terrible." "Sarah, I need you to come over right now and bring your camera." "What's wrong? Did something happen with Liam?" I was still staring out the window, watching for any further movement from Marcus's apartment. "Aunt Beatrice is at Marcus Thorne's apartment right now, in the middle of the afternoon when they should both be at work, and they're not having a business meeting." There was silence on the other end of the line, for a moment. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying that the woman who's been accusing me of having an affair with my neighbor is actually having an affair with my neighbor, and I need proof before she leaves. I'm on my way, Sarah said without hesitation. Don't do anything until I get there. The 20 minutes it took for Sarah to arrive felt like hours. I maintained my vigil at the kitchen window, documenting the time and taking mental notes of everything I observed. Aunt Beatrice's car remained in Marcus's parking spot, and I caught glimpses of movement through his windows that confirmed she was still inside. When Sarah's car pulled up, I met her at the front door before she could even knock. She took one look at my face and immediately understood the gravity of the situation. "Show me," she said simply. I led her to the kitchen window and pointed toward Marcus's apartment. Her car's been there for almost an hour. I've seen them moving around inside together. This isn't a business meeting, Sarah. Sarah studied the scene, her expression growing more serious by the moment. Alara, if what you're saying is true, this changes everything, but we need to be absolutely certain before you confront anyone. I know what I saw, I said. But even as I spoke the words, I realized how they echoed the same certainty Aunt Beatrice had expressed about my supposed affair. The difference was that I had actual evidence, not just gossip and misinterpretation. Okay, Sarah said, pulling out her phone. Let's document this properly. Timestamps, photos, everything we can get without trespassing or doing anything. Illegal. For the next 30 minutes, we maintained careful surveillance from my kitchen window. Sarah took time-stamped photos of Aunt Beatrice's car in Marcus's parking spot, and we both witnessed several instances of movement through his windows that suggested two people were inside together, moving in close proximity in ways that didn't suggest a business relationship. Finally, around 5:30 p.m., Marcus's front door opened. Aunt Beatrice emerged first, looking around carefully before stepping fully outside. She was adjusting her clothing and hair, classic signs of someone who'd been engaged in physical activity and was trying to restore their appearance. Marcus appeared in the doorway behind her, shirtless, clearly having just thrown on jeans to see her out. Sarah's camera captured it all. The intimate way they stood together on his doorstep, the lingering goodbye that included what was obviously a passionate kiss, the way Aunt Beatrice looked around nervously before getting into her car. By the time she backed out of his driveway, we had a comprehensive record of her afternoon activities. This is unbelievable, Sarah murmured, reviewing the photos on her phone. She's been gaslighting you about an affair that she's actually having herself. I felt a mixture of vindication and devastation wash over me. Vindication because I finally had proof that Aunt Beatrice's accusations against me were pure projection, a deliberate smokescreen to hide her own guilty behavior. Devastation because the woman I'd trusted as family had betrayed not only me and Liam, but also her own boyfriend, Daniel, whom I'd grown to genuinely like over the past 2 years. What do I do with this? I asked, gesturing toward Sarah's phone full of incriminating photos. You use it to get your life back, she replied firmly. But Alara, you need to be strategic about this. Don't confront Aunt Beatrice directly. Don't show Liam until you have a plan. This is nuclear evidence, and you only get one chance to use it effectively. As we sat in my kitchen planning my next moves, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. Not just hope that I could clear my name and restore my marriage, but hope that I could expose Aunt Beatrice for what she really was and protect my family from her manipulations once and for all. The woman who had tried to destroy my life with lies had just handed me the truth about her own deceptions, and I was going to make sure that truth saw the light of day in the most devastating way possible. Sarah stayed for dinner that evening, helping me maintain some semblance of normalcy for Maya and Leo while my mind raced with possibilities. The children chattered about their day at school, completely oblivious to the fact that their world was about to change dramatically. Liam came home late, as had become his habit, and barely acknowledged Sarah's presence beyond a polite greeting. The distance between us felt like a chasm that grew wider with each passing hour. After the children were tucked into bed and Sarah had gone home, Liam and I found ourselves alone in our living room for the first time in days. The silence stretched uncomfortably between us until he finally spoke. "I've been thinking about our conversation this morning," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Maybe we should consider counseling." The suggestion should have felt like progress, but his tone suggested he viewed counseling as a way to fix my supposed problem rather than address the real issues in our marriage. "What kind of counseling?" I asked carefully. "Marriage. Counseling? Individual therapy for you? Something to help you work through whatever's going on with your relationship with Marcus." I felt my temper flare despite my efforts to stay calm. "Liam, there is no relationship with Marcus. There's nothing to work through except your sister's manipulation and your willingness to believe her over me. Aunt Beatrice cares about our family, Alara. She wouldn't make something like this up. Wouldn't she?" I asked, thinking about the photos on Sarah's phone, the evidence of Aunt Beatrice's own betrayal that Liam had no idea existed. "Are you so sure about that?" Something in my tone must have caught his attention because he looked at me directly for the first time in the conversation. "What do you mean?" I was tempted to tell him everything right then, to show him the evidence and watch his world crumble the same way mine had been crumbling for weeks. But Sarah's advice echoed in my mind. I needed to be strategic, to think through the implications before I played my hand. "I mean that Aunt Beatrice has never liked me, Liam. She's always resented our relationship, always looked for ways to come between us. And now she's found the perfect weapon, an accusation that's impossible to disprove because it's based on interpretation of innocent interactions." Liam shook his head, his expression stubborn. "That's not fair, Ilara. Aunt Beatrice loves you like a sister." "Does she? When's the last time she said something genuinely supportive about me? When's the last time she defended me, instead of criticizing me? When's the last time she showed any real interest in my life beyond finding fault with it?" The questions hung in the air unanswered, because we both knew the truth. Aunt Beatrice had never been supportive of me, had never treated me like family, despite her claims to the contrary. But Liam had always been blind to his sister's true nature, preferring to see her as the protective older sibling rather than the manipulative woman she'd become. "I need some air," Liam said, standing abruptly. "I'm going for a walk." After he left, I sat alone in our living room, surrounded by the detritus of our family life. Maya's art projects scattered across the coffee table, Leo's soccer cleats by the front door, family photos lining the mantelpiece. 10 years of shared history, and it was all being threatened by one woman's lies and jealousy. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Detective Ben Carter had been my friend since college, one of the few people from my past who'd maintained regular contact through the years. He worked for the city police department, specializing in domestic cases, and I trusted him to give me honest advice about my situation. "Alara, it's good to hear from you," Ben said when he answered, though I could hear concern in his voice. "It's been a while since you called this late. Everything okay?" "Not exactly," I admitted. "Ben, I need some advice, and I need to know it stays between us for now." "Of course. What's going on?" I gave him the condensed version of the past few weeks, from Aunt Beatrice's initial accusations through the escalating campaign against me to the discovery of her affair with Marcus. Ben listened without interrupting, occasionally asking clarifying questions that showed he was taking detailed mental notes. "So, let me get this straight," he said when I finished. "Your sister-in-law has convinced your husband that you're having an affair based on neighborhood gossip and an innocent photo, while she's actually having an affair with the same man she's accused you of being involved with." "That's exactly right." There was a long pause before Ben spoke again. "Alara, this is textbook projection and gaslighting. Aunt Beatrice is deflecting suspicion from her own behavior by creating a false narrative about yours. The question is, what do you want to do about it? I want to clear my name and save my marriage, I said immediately. But I also want to make sure she can't do this to anyone else ever again. Those are admirable goals, but you need to think carefully about how you approach this. Do you have concrete evidence of Aunt Beatrice's affair? I described the photos Sarah had taken, the time-stamped documentation of Aunt Beatrice's car in Marcus's parking spot, the images of their intimate goodbye. Ben listened intently, occasionally asking technical questions about the photographic evidence. That's good documentation, he said finally. But Ilara, you need to be prepared for the possibility that this evidence might not have the impact you're hoping for. What do you mean? I mean that Liam has been conditioned to distrust you and believe Aunt Beatrice. When you present this evidence, his first instinct might be to find ways to explain it away, or even to blame you for spying on his sister. People who are emotionally invested in a particular narrative don't always respond rationally to contradictory evidence. The possibility hadn't occurred to me, but I could see the truth in Ben's words. Liam had already demonstrated his willingness to believe the worst about me while giving Aunt Beatrice every benefit of the doubt. Would photographic evidence of her affair be enough to break through years of sibling loyalty and recent conditioning? So what do you suggest I do? Build a stronger case. Right now, you have evidence of one afternoon, which Aunt Beatrice could potentially explain away. You need to establish a pattern. Document multiple instances. Gather enough evidence. That denial becomes impossible. How long will that take? Depends on how frequently they're meeting and how careful they're being. But Ilara, you also need to think about your own safety and well-being during this process. Gathering evidence while living with someone who's been turned against you isn't sustainable long-term. Ben was right, of course. The stress of the past few weeks had already taken a toll on my health and my ability to function normally. My work performance was suffering. My relationship with my children was strained by the constant tension in the apartment, and I was barely sleeping or eating. I can't keep living like this, I admitted. But I can't just give up either. If I leave now, it looks like an admission of guilt. If I stay and do nothing, Aunt Beatrice wins by default. Then you need to be smart about how you proceed. Document everything, but don't let it consume your life. Take care of yourself and your children first. And Ilara, consider having a backup plan in case things go badly. A backup plan? Legal consultation, financial preparation, emergency housing arrangements. I'm not saying it will come to that, but you need to be prepared for all possibilities. After hanging up with Ben, I spent the rest of the evening researching divorce attorneys in our area and family law procedures. The process felt surreal, like I was planning for the end of a life I'd never wanted to leave behind. But Ben's advice was sound. I needed to be prepared for any outcome, including the possibility that even concrete evidence of Aunt Beatrice's betrayal wouldn't be enough to save my marriage. The next few days fell into a tense routine. Liam left early for work and came home late, avoiding extended conversations with me. Aunt Beatrice continued her regular visits, always arriving when Liam was home, always managing to steer conversations toward concerns about my behavior or mental state. I maintained my normal schedule at the design studio while secretly monitoring Marcus's apartment whenever possible, documenting the pattern of Aunt Beatrice's visits. What I discovered was more extensive than I'd initially realized. Aunt Beatrice's car appeared in Marcus's parking spot at least 3 times a week, always during hours when she should have been working and always when Liam was at his office. She was careful about timing, usually arriving mid-morning and leaving by early afternoon, presumably to avoid suspicion from other neighbors who might mention her frequent visits to Liam. I began keeping a detailed log of her visits, complete with timestamps and photographic evidence. Sarah helped when she could, stopping by during her days off to provide additional witness verification. We were building a comprehensive case that would be impossible to dismiss or explain away. During this surveillance period, I also started paying closer attention to Aunt Beatrice's behavior during family gatherings. What I noticed made my skin crawl. She was constantly touching Liam, finding excuses for physical contact that went beyond normal sibling affection. A hand on his shoulder that lingered too long, standing closer to him than necessary during conversations, playful nudges and touches that made me increasingly uncomfortable. More disturbing was the way she spoke about Marcus during these visits. She would bring him up in conversation regularly, always in the context of her concerns about my behavior. But there was something in her tone that suggested a personal interest. That went beyond protective worry. She knew details about his work schedule, his daughter's activities, his daily routines that went far beyond what a concerned sister-in-law should know about a neighbor. "I saw Marcus leaving for work this morning around 6:30, she mentioned during one visit, addressing Liam while pointedly ignoring me. "He looked tired. I hope he's not staying up too late dealing with neighborhood drama." The comment was clearly directed at me, suggesting that I was somehow responsible for Marcus's tiredness by pursuing an imaginary relationship with him. But what struck me was her detailed knowledge of his morning routine and her apparent observation of his physical appearance. These weren't casual, neighborly observations. They were the notes of someone who was paying very close attention to his daily life. I also began to notice that Aunt Beatrice's visits to our apartment often coincided with times when Marcus would be coming or going from his property. She would position herself near our front windows during conversations, maintaining visual contact with his apartment while appearing to focus on family discussions. It was subtle, but once I started looking for it, the pattern became obvious. The breakthrough came during my 4th week of documentation. I was working a day shift at the design studio, having switched schedules with a colleague when I received a text from Sarah. "Emergency. Come home if you can. Bring camera." I told my supervisor I had a family emergency and left work immediately, my heart pounding as I drove through the city streets. Sarah's car was parked around the corner from our building, and she was waiting in the driver's seat with her phone in hand. "What's happening?" I asked, sliding into her passenger seat. "Aunt Beatrice has been at Marcus's apartment for 2 hours, Sarah said, showing me her phone screen with a series of time-stamped photos. "But that's not the emergency. Look." She swiped to a new photo, and I gasped. Through Marcus's living room window, clearly visible from the street, Aunt Beatrice and Marcus were embracing passionately. They were partially undressed, and there was no mistaking the intimate nature of their interaction. "They left the curtains open," Sarah explained. "I guess they thought everyone was at work and didn't expect to be seen." "Did you get clear shots?" "Multiple angles, timestamps, everything. Alara, this isn't just an affair. This is a full-blown relationship. They're comfortable enough with each other to be careless about privacy." I stared at the photos, feeling a mixture of vindication and revulsion. Here was undeniable proof of Aunt Beatrice's hypocrisy, clear evidence that she was guilty of everything she'd accused me of, and more. But seeing the images also drove home the reality of how thoroughly she'd manipulated everyone around her. "There's more," Sarah continued, swiping to additional photos. "Look at the timestamps. She's been there since 10 this morning. That's 4 hours, Alara. This isn't a quick hookup. They're spending significant time together." I studied the timeline Sarah had documented. Aunt Beatrice had arrived at Marcus's apartment shortly after Liam left for work, and I left for my shift. She'd clearly been watching our schedules, timing her visits to avoid detection. The level of planning and deception involved was staggering. "We need to get closer," I said, surprising myself with my boldness. "From the street, we can only see part of the living room. There might be other angles that show more." Sarah looked concerned. "Alara, I don't want you to do anything that could get you in legal trouble. Stalking charges wouldn't help your case." "I'm not stalking anyone. I'm documenting suspicious activity in my own neighborhood from public property. And Sarah, this is my one chance to get irrefutable evidence." Aunt Beatrice is getting careless because she thinks she's won. If I wait, she might become more careful. We spent the next hour strategically positioning ourselves around the neighborhood, taking advantage of public sidewalks and sight lines to document Aunt Beatrice's extended visit to Marcus's apartment. The photos we captured left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. They were clearly comfortable together, moving around his apartment like a couple, sharing intimate moments that spoke of an established relationship rather than a new affair. When Aunt Beatrice finally emerged from Marcus's apartment at nearly 3:01 in the afternoon, she looked thoroughly disheveled despite obvious attempts to fix her appearance. Her hair was messy, her clothing wrinkled, and she carried herself with the satisfied exhaustion of someone who'd spent hours engaged in physical intimacy. 5 hours, Sarah murmured, checking her final timestamp. She spent 5 hours at his apartment while accusing you of having an affair with him. As we watched Aunt Beatrice drive away, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. For weeks, I'd been living in a fog of confusion and self-doubt, questioning my own perceptions and wondering if there might be some truth to the accusations against me. Now I had absolute clarity about what was really happening and what I needed to do about it. "When are you going to tell Liam?" Sarah asked as we drove back toward my apartment. "Tonight," I said with certainty. "No more waiting, no more strategy. He needs to see what his sister really is." But as we pulled into my parking spot, I saw Liam's car already there, hours earlier than usual. Through our living room window, I could see him sitting on the couch with Aunt Beatrice, deep in what appeared to be a serious conversation. My heart sank as I realized she might be getting ahead of the situation, potentially preparing some kind of preemptive explanation for her presence in the neighborhood that day. "She's already here," I told Sarah, pointing toward the apartment. "She's probably building another lie as we speak." "Then you need to get in there and stop her," Sarah replied firmly. "You have the truth now, Ilara. Don't let her rewrite the narrative again." I took a deep breath, clutching my phone with its damning photographic evidence, and prepared to confront the woman who had nearly destroyed my life with her projections and lies. The next few minutes would determine the future of my marriage, my family, and my ability to trust the people closest to me. As I walked toward my front door, I could hear Aunt Beatrice's voice through the window, animated and urgent, undoubtedly, spinning another web of deception designed to protect herself while further damaging me. But this time, I had the weapons I needed to fight back. This time, the truth was on my side. I walked through my front door with Sarah close behind me, the weight of the evidence on my phone feeling heavier than any burden I'd ever carried. The conversation in the living room stopped abruptly when we entered, and I could see Liam's face turn toward us with an expression of surprise, mixed with something that might have been guilt. Aunt Beatrice was perched on the edge of our coffee table, leaning toward Liam in an intimate posture that struck me as inappropriate for siblings. Her cheeks were flushed, and there was a brightness in her eyes that suggested excitement rather than concern. When she saw me, her expression shifted quickly to one of sympathetic worry, but not before I caught that flash of something else. "Ilara, honey, perfect timing," Aunt Beatrice said, standing and smoothing down her skirt in a gesture I now recognized as a nervous habit. "Liam and I were just discussing the situation with Marcus Thorne." "Were you?" I asked, setting my purse down carefully and maintaining eye contact with her. "What situation, exactly?" Liam cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Aunt Beatrice came over because she's worried about escalation. She thinks Marcus might be becoming more aggressive in pursuing you." I felt Sarah tense beside me, but I kept my voice level. "Aggressive? How?" "Well," Aunt Beatrice began, moving closer to Liam as if seeking protection, "I've noticed him watching your apartment more frequently, and this afternoon, when I drove by on my way to show a property, I saw him in his window when he should have been at work. It seemed like he was waiting for someone." The lie was so brazen, so completely contrary to what I knew she'd actually been doing that afternoon. that for a moment I was speechless. She'd spent 5 hours in Marcus's apartment, engaging in an intimate relationship with him. And now she was claiming he was stalking me. "That's interesting," I said finally. "What time did you drive by?" "Around 2:30, Aunt Beatrice replied without hesitation. I was concerned enough that I called Liam at work to discuss it. I looked at my husband, studying his face for any sign that he recognized the absurdity of his sister's claims. "And what did you decide?" "We think it might be time to involve the police," Liam said, his tone suggesting he'd already made up his mind. "If Marcus is becoming obsessive about you, we need to document it before it goes too far." The irony was so complete it was almost funny. Aunt Beatrice was suggesting we involve law enforcement to investigate Marcus for behavior that existed only in her imagination, while she was actually guilty of the affair she'd been accusing me of having with him. "That's a serious accusation," Sarah said, speaking for the first time since we'd entered. "Stalking charges can ruin someone's career, especially someone in public safety, like a software engineer whose work involves sensitive data." Aunt Beatrice's eyes narrowed slightly as she focused on Sarah. "I'm sorry, but this is really a family matter. I don't think Alara needs outside influence right now." "Actually," I said, pulling out my phone, "I think Alara needs all the support she can get, especially when she's being falsely accused." "Falsely accused?" Aunt Beatrice's voice rose in pitch, and I caught a glimpse of panic in her expression. "Ilara, sweetie, I know this is hard to accept, but denial isn't healthy." "You're absolutely right," I agreed. "Denial isn't healthy, so let's stop denying reality and look at some actual evidence." I opened my photo gallery and selected the clearest image Sarah had captured that afternoon, the one showing Aunt Beatrice and Marcus embracing passionately in his living room window. I held the phone out so Liam could see the screen clearly. "This was taken at 1:47 this afternoon," I said, watching his face change as he processed what he was seeing. "About 45 minutes before Aunt Beatrice claims she drove by and saw Marcus watching our apartment." Liam took the phone from my hand, staring at the image with growing shock. The photo was undeniably clear, showing Aunt Beatrice in Marcus's arms, both of them partially undressed, engaged in an obviously intimate moment. "What is this?" Liam asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's your sister having an affair with Marcus Thorne," I replied steadily. "The same affair she's been accusing me of having for the past month." Aunt Beatrice lunged forward, trying to grab the phone from Liam's hands. "That's not what it looks like. You don't understand the context." But Liam pulled the phone away from her reach, swiping through the other photos I'd taken. Each image told the same story, documenting hours of intimate interaction between Aunt Beatrice and Marcus. Time-stamped evidence that made her denials impossible to maintain. "Context," Liam repeated, his voice growing stronger as anger began to replace shock. "What context makes this okay, Aunt Beatrice?" "It's not what you think," Aunt Beatrice said desperately, her composure finally cracking. "Marcus has been manipulating me, using me to get information about Alara. He's been playing us against each other." Even in her panic, she was still trying to manipulate the situation, to paint herself as a victim rather than the architect of this entire deception. But the evidence was too clear, too comprehensive for her lies to hold any weight. Sarah stepped forward and handed Liam her phone, which contained the extended documentation we'd gathered over the past month. "These photos span 4 weeks," she said calmly. "They show a pattern of visits, always during work hours, always when Alara was at the design studio. This isn't manipulation. It's a deliberate, ongoing affair." Liam scrolled through the images, his face growing paler with each swipe. The timeline was damning, showing Aunt Beatrice's regular visits to Marcus's apartment, her intimate farewells, her careful timing to avoid detection. The evidence painted a picture of a woman who had been living a double life while systematically destroying her sister-in-law's marriage. "You've been watching me," Aunt Beatrice demanded, turning on me with a fury I'd never seen from her before. "You've been stalking me and taking pictures without my consent. I've been documenting suspicious activity in my neighborhood," I replied calmly. "The same thing you claimed to be doing when you told Liam about Marcus supposedly watching our apartment." "This is illegal surveillance," Aunt Beatrice continued, her voice rising to a near shriek. "You can't use these photos for anything." "Actually, I can," Sarah interjected. "They were taken from public property of activities visible from the street. There's no expectation of privacy when you're conducting an affair in front of uncovered windows." Liam finally looked up from the phones, his expression a mixture of devastation and rage. "How long?" he asked Aunt Beatrice. "How long has this been going on?" "Liam, you have to understand," Aunt Beatrice began. "How long?" he repeated, his voice cutting through her attempts at explanation. Aunt Beatrice's shoulders sagged as she realized her lies had finally caught up with her. "3 months, she admitted quietly. "But it's not what you think. It started as research, trying to figure out if Alara was really involved with him." "Research?" I couldn't keep the disbelief out of my voice. "You call having a 3-month affair research?" "I was trying to protect our family," Aunt Beatrice snapped, her mask finally slipping completely. "Marcus told me that you'd been coming on to him, that you'd been inappropriate with him. I was trying to get evidence to prove it." "By sleeping with him?" Liam asked, his voice deadly quiet. "By gaining his trust so he'd tell me the truth about Alara's behavior," Aunt Beatrice replied. But even she seemed to realize how absurd her explanation sounded. "And what truth did he tell you?" I asked, genuinely curious about how far her delusions extended. Aunt Beatrice hesitated, clearly realizing she'd painted herself into a corner. He said you'd been flirting with him, making suggestive comments, trying to get him alone. When I pressed, "Give me specific examples," he mentioned several instances, such as the building social. Aunt Beatrice said desperately, "He said you were all over him at the social." I pulled out my own phone and showed Liam the photo that had started this entire nightmare. The innocent image of Marcus and me laughing together. "This photo? The one you used as evidence against me? Marcus told you I was all over him when this was taken?" "Yes," Aunt Beatrice said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Then why," I continued, "was he posting it on social media with a caption thanking me for making him feel welcome? Why would he advertise my supposed inappropriate behavior?" Aunt Beatrice opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She'd been caught in another lie, and we all knew it. Liam set both phones down on the coffee table and stood up slowly. "Get out," he said to Aunt Beatrice, his voice barely controlled. "Liam, please let me explain." "Get out of my apartment," he repeated, louder this time. "Get out and don't come back." "You're my brother," Aunt Beatrice cried, tears starting to flow down her cheeks. "You can't choose her over family." "Family?" Liam's voice was incredulous. "You call what you've done family? You've been lying to me for months, Aunt Beatrice. You've been trying to destroy my marriage while having an affair yourself. You've turned me against my wife based on complete fabrications. I was trying to protect you." "You were trying to destroy us," I said firmly. "And the only question is why?" Aunt Beatrice's eyes darted between Liam and me, and I could see her calculating whether she had any cards left to play. "You want to know why?" she asked, her voice taking on a bitter edge. "Because you don't deserve him, Alara. You never did." The admission hung in the air like a toxic cloud. After all the lies and manipulation, Aunt Beatrice had finally revealed her true motivation. This hadn't been about protecting Liam or our family. It had been about her jealousy and resentment, her inability to accept that her brother had chosen me over her approval. "You've been jealous of our marriage for 10 years, I continued, pieces clicking into place. "You've never been able to stand that Liam loves me more than he loves you. He's my brother, Aunt Beatrice shouted. We were close before you came along and poisoned him against his own family. I never poisoned anyone against anything, I replied. I married Liam and built a life with him. If that threatened your relationship with him, that says more about your relationship than it does about mine. Liam was staring at his sister with an expression of dawning understanding. This is why you never liked Alara, he said slowly. This is why you've always found fault with everything she does. You've been trying to break us up since the beginning. She changed you, Aunt Beatrice said desperately. You used to call me every day. Used to ask my opinion about everything. Now you barely have time for me. Because I grew up, Aunt Beatrice. Because I got married and started a family and developed priorities beyond my older sister's need for attention. The words were harsh, but accurate. I could see in Aunt Beatrice's face that they hit their mark, stripping away her last pretense of righteous concern and revealing the petty jealousy that had motivated her actions. So, you decided to destroy my marriage by having an affair with Marcus and then blaming me for it, I said. You thought if you could convince Liam I was cheating, he'd leave me and you'd have your brother back. It would have worked if you hadn't been spying on me, Aunt Beatrice said, her voice venomous now that her mask had completely slipped. It would have worked if you hadn't been stupid enough to conduct your affair in front of uncovered windows, Sarah corrected. Liam walked to the front door and opened it wide. Leave, he told Aunt Beatrice. Leave now and don't contact me or my family again. Liam, please. Now, Aunt Beatrice. She gathered her purse and walked toward the door, her composure completely shattered. At the threshold, she turned back one last time. This isn't over, she said, looking directly at me. You think you've won, but this isn't over. Yes, it is, Liam said firmly, closing the door behind her. The silence that followed was deafening. Liam and I stood in our living room, surrounded by the wreckage of trust that Aunt Beatrice had created, trying to process everything that had just happened. Sarah quietly gathered the phones with their damning evidence, giving us space to begin dealing with the emotional aftermath. I'm sorry, Liam said finally, his voice broken. Alara, I'm so sorry I didn't believe. You. I wanted to feel vindicated, to experience the rush of victory that should come with being proven right after weeks of accusations and doubt. Instead, I felt empty, drained by the realization of how thoroughly Aunt Beatrice had manipulated all of us. How do we come back from this? I asked, genuinely uncertain about the answer. Liam sat down heavily on our couch, his head in his hands. I don't know, he admitted. I accused you of having an affair while my sister was actually having one. I chose to believe her lies over 10 years of marriage to you. I don't know how you can ever trust me again. It was a valid question, one that would take time and effort to answer. The damage Aunt Beatrice had done to our marriage couldn't be undone simply by exposing her lies. The fact that Liam had been so easily turned against me, so willing to believe the worst about me based on gossip and manipulation, revealed problems in our relationship that went beyond his sister's interference. We start with honesty, I said finally. Complete honesty about everything, and we figure out how to make sure nothing like this can happen again. Sarah cleared her throat softly. I'll leave you two to talk, she said, handing me both phones. But Alara, you should know that I'm proud of you for fighting back. A lot of people would have just accepted the accusations and tried to live with them. After Sarah left, Liam and I sat together in our living room, finally beginning the conversation we should have had weeks ago. It would be a long road back to trust and intimacy, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt hope that we might actually make it. The evidence on our phones would ensure that Aunt Beatrice could never again claim the moral high ground or try to manipulate our family dynamics. Her affair with Marcus would undoubtedly become neighborhood knowledge, destroying her reputation and credibility. Most importantly, Liam had seen his sister's true nature, and there would be no going back to the dynamic that had allowed her to wield so much influence over our marriage. As we talked late into the night, planning our path forward and beginning to rebuild the trust that had been so badly damaged, I realized that Aunt Beatrice had unknowingly given us a gift. Her betrayal had forced us to confront issues in our marriage that might have otherwise remained hidden, and her lies had ultimately made our foundation stronger by testing it so thoroughly. The woman who had tried to destroy our family had instead given us the opportunity to build something better, something that couldn't be shaken by outside manipulation or false accusations. It would take time, effort, and a lot of difficult conversations. But I finally believed that our marriage could survive what Aunt Beatrice had done to it. The weeks following Aunt Beatrice's dramatic exit from our home felt like emerging from a fog that had clouded my vision for months. Liam and I began the difficult process of rebuilding our marriage, starting with complete transparency about everything that had happened. He shared with me the extent of Aunt Beatrice's manipulation, admitting that she had been calling him daily at work, feeding him new concerns about my behavior, and gradually eroding his trust in me with carefully crafted stories and observations. She made it seem like she was reluctantly sharing information, Liam explained during one of our late-night conversations. Like she didn't want to tell me these things, but felt obligated to protect our family. She had this way of presenting everything as if she was struggling with whether to say anything at all. I listened to his descriptions of Aunt Beatrice's psychological manipulation with a mixture of anger and fascination. She had been methodical in her approach, never making direct accusations, but instead planting seeds of doubt and letting Liam's imagination fill in the blanks. She would mention seeing Marcus's car at unusual times, suggest that I seemed distracted lately, or comment that other neighbors had made observations about my behavior. Each piece was small enough to seem insignificant on its own, but together, they had created a comprehensive case against me in Liam's mind. The worst part, Liam continued, is that I wanted to believe her. Not because I thought you were cheating, but because it gave me an excuse for why I felt disconnected from you. Instead of examining our relationship and my own behavior, it was easier to blame outside forces. This admission cut deep because it revealed truths about our marriage that went beyond Aunt Beatrice's interference. Liam and I had grown distant over the years, caught up in the routine of work and childcare and household management, taking each other for granted in ways that had made us vulnerable to exactly the kind of manipulation Aunt Beatrice had employed. We stopped really talking to each other, I acknowledged. We talked about schedules and bills and the kids' activities, but we stopped sharing our thoughts and feelings and dreams. We became roommates who happened to be married. The process of rebuilding intimacy was challenging and sometimes painful. We had to learn how to be vulnerable with each other again, how to trust each other with our deepest concerns and fears. Liam had to accept that his willingness to believe his sister over his wife had damaged something fundamental in our relationship, while I had to confront my own role in allowing our emotional distance to develop over the years. We decided to attend marriage counseling together, working with Dr. Evelyn Reed, a therapist who specialized in trust and communication issues. The sessions were difficult but productive, forcing us to examine patterns of behavior that had been building for years. Dr. Reed helped us understand how Aunt Beatrice had been able to exploit existing vulnerabilities in our relationship and, more importantly, how to strengthen those weak points to prevent future manipulation. Trust isn't just about fidelity, Dr. Reed explained during one session. It's about believing that your partner has your best interests at heart, that they'll give you the benefit of the doubt when questions arise, and that they'll come to you directly with concerns rather than listening to outside voices. 1. Of the most challenging aspects of our recovery was dealing with the children's questions about why Aunt Beatrice no longer visited our home. Maya and Leo had grown accustomed to her regular presence, and her sudden absence required explanations that were age-appropriate while still honest about the situation. Aunt Beatrice made some choices that hurt our family, I told them during a family meeting. Sometimes adults make mistakes that have consequences, and one of those consequences is that she can't visit us anymore. Did she do something bad? Maya asked, her 9-year-old mind trying to process the adult complexities of betrayal and deception. She did something that broke trust, Liam explained. Trust is one of the most important things in a family, and when someone breaks it, there are consequences. Will she ever be able to visit again? Leo wondered, his 7-year-old optimism hoping for eventual reconciliation. Liam and I exchanged glances, both of us knowing that some betrayals are too fundamental to forgive. We don't know, I said honestly. Right now, we need to focus on taking care of our family and making sure everyone feels safe and loved. The children accepted our explanations with the resilience that kids often display when adults handle difficult situations with honesty and consistency. They missed Aunt Beatrice initially, but as the weeks passed without her dramatic presence and constant undercurrents of tension, our home became more peaceful and stable. Meanwhile, the fallout from Aunt Beatrice's exposed affair continued to ripple through our building and her professional life. Word spread quickly about the dramatic confrontation and the photographic evidence of her relationship with Marcus Thorne. The same neighbors who had been so eager to gossip about my supposed inappropriate behavior now had real scandal to discuss. Marcus Thorne, faced with undeniable evidence of his affair with a married woman, made the decision to relocate. He put his apartment on the market within 2 weeks of the confrontation, citing a desire to transfer to a different tech firm and start fresh somewhere new. I felt sorry for his daughter, Chloe, who had to leave her new school and friends because of the mess her father had created. Before he left, Marcus approached me one afternoon while I was retrieving mail from the lobby. He looked haggard and embarrassed, clearly struggling with the consequences of his actions. "I owe you an apology," he said, staying a respectful distance away. "I never meant for any of this to affect your marriage." I continued sorting my mail, not sure I was ready for this conversation, but willing to listen. "Aunt Beatrice told me you were interested in me," Marcus continued. "She said you'd been asking about me, wondering if I was single, making comments about being lonely in your marriage. She presented it like she was trying to help both of us by facilitating a connection." I looked up at him, seeing genuine remorse in his expression. "And you believed her?" "I wanted to," he admitted. "You're an attractive woman, and I was lonely after my divorce. When Aunt Beatrice suggested that you might be interested, it felt like a gift. She made it seem like she was playing matchmaker, helping two lonely people find each other." "Even though I was married?" Marcus's face reddened. "She said your marriage was practically over, that you and Liam were just staying together, for the kids. She made it sound like you were ready to leave but just needed encouragement." The sophistication of Aunt Beatrice's manipulation became clearer with Marcus's explanation. She hadn't simply seduced him. She had constructed an elaborate narrative that painted her as the helpful sister-in-law, trying to facilitate my happiness while simultaneously pursuing her own affair with him. "When did you realize she was lying?" I asked. "When the accusations against you started," Marcus said. "Suddenly, Aunt Beatrice was worried about your behavior toward me, warning me to be careful around you, suggesting that you might be becoming obsessive. It didn't match anything she'd told me before, and it didn't match my actual interactions with you. But you continued the affair anyway." "By then I was in too deep," Marcus admitted. "Aunt Beatrice was intense. She made it clear that if I tried to end things with her, she'd tell everyone that you'd been pursuing me and that I'd rejected you. She said she'd destroy your reputation and your marriage to protect her brother." I felt a chill as I realized how thoroughly Aunt Beatrice had manipulated everyone involved. She had created a web of lies and threats that kept Marcus trapped in the affair, while simultaneously using that affair as evidence against me. She had been playing all sides, positioning herself as the concerned sister-in-law while privately threatening to destroy anyone who didn't cooperate with her plans. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because you deserve to know the truth," Marcus replied. And because I'm ashamed of what I allowed myself to become a part of. Aunt Beatrice used both of us, and I'm sorry I didn't have the courage to stop it sooner. After Marcus left, I sat in my apartment thinking about the layers of deception Aunt Beatrice had employed. She hadn't simply been having an affair. She had been orchestrating an elaborate scheme designed to destroy my marriage while protecting herself from consequences. The level of calculation involved was genuinely frightening. I shared Marcus's revelations with Liam that evening, and we both struggled to process the extent of Aunt Beatrice's manipulation. She had been playing a game with multiple moving pieces, positioning everyone exactly where she needed them to achieve her goal of breaking up our marriage. She created a scenario where no matter what happened, she won, Liam realized. If you'd actually pursued Marcus, she could have exposed you as a cheater. If Marcus had rejected her advances, she could have claimed he was harassing you. If you'd discovered the affair earlier, she could have said she was gathering evidence of his inappropriate behavior toward you. And if we'd divorced, I added, she would have gotten what she really wanted, you without me. The psychological profile that emerged from our analysis was deeply disturbing. Aunt Beatrice wasn't simply a jealous sister-in-law. She was someone capable of sustained, calculated manipulation, designed to achieve specific outcomes regardless of the collateral damage to everyone involved. As the weeks turned into months, Liam and I continued working on rebuilding our relationship while dealing with the practical consequences of Aunt Beatrice's actions. Her interior design career suffered significantly as word spread about her affair and the manipulation of her family members. Several clients canceled contracts, and her agency began distancing itself from the scandal. Aunt Beatrice made several attempts to contact Liam, leaving voicemails that alternated between tearful apologies and angry accusations. She claimed that I had manipulated the evidence against her, that the photos had been doctored, that Marcus had been lying about their relationship to protect himself. Each message revealed her continued inability to accept responsibility for her actions. "She's never going to admit what she did," Liam observed after listening to one particularly vitriolic voicemail. "She's convinced herself that she's the victim in all of this." "Does that bother you?" I asked, studying his face for signs of wavering resolve. "No," Liam said firmly. "It confirms that cutting her out of our lives was the right decision. Someone who can do what she did and still see herself as the victim isn't someone I want around my family." The most satisfying development came when Daniel, Aunt Beatrice's boyfriend of 2 years, reached out to me directly. He had apparently heard about the affair through mutual friends and wanted to understand what had really happened. "I'd been wondering about some things," Daniel admitted when we met for coffee at a neutral location downtown. Aunt Beatrice had been distant lately, canceling plans at the last minute, being secretive about her schedule. When I confronted her about it, she said she was dealing with family drama related to your marriage problems. "What did she tell you about my marriage problems?" I asked, curious about how she had presented the situation to him. "She said you were having an affair with your neighbor, and that she was trying to help Liam deal with it. She made it sound like she was sacrificing her own time and energy to support her brother through a difficult situation." I showed Daniel some of the photographic evidence we had gathered, watching his face change as he processed the reality of Aunt Beatrice's betrayal. He had been completely unaware of her affair, believing her stories about family obligations and work commitments. 2 years, Daniel said quietly. "I thought we were building toward marriage. We'd talked about moving in together, about starting a family, and the whole time she was carrying on with someone else." "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it. "You didn't deserve this any more than Liam and I did." "At least you fought back," Daniel replied. "You gathered evidence and exposed the truth. I just accepted her explanations and trusted her to be honest with me." Daniel's response to Aunt Beatrice's betrayal was swift and decisive. He ended their relationship immediately, blocked her on all social media platforms, and made it clear to their mutual friends that he wanted no further contact with her. Unlike Liam's initial response to my supposed affair, Daniel didn't require extensive evidence or counseling to recognize that Aunt Beatrice's behavior was unacceptable. The contrast between the two men's reactions highlighted something important about the different relationships involved. Daniel's trust in Aunt Beatrice had been based on a relatively short-term romantic relationship, while Liam's trust in his sister was rooted in decades of family history and emotional conditioning. Aunt Beatrice had spent years positioning herself as Liam's protector and confidant, making it much harder for him to recognize her manipulation when it occurred. Dr. Reed helped us understand this dynamic during our counseling sessions. Family relationships involve different types of trust and loyalty, she explained. When someone has been positioned as a protector or advisor within a family system, it can be very difficult to recognize when they become a threat instead. The therapeutic process also helped Liam understand how his relationship with Aunt Beatrice had been unhealthy long before she targeted our marriage. She had always been possessive of his attention and jealous of his other relationships, but he had interpreted this as caring rather than manipulation. She never liked any of my girlfriends, Liam realized during one session. She always found reasons why they weren't good enough for me, why I could do better. I thought she was being protective, but she was actually being controlling. And what happened when those relationships ended? Dr. Reed asked. Aunt Beatrice was always there to comfort me and remind me that family was more important than romantic relationships anyway. Liam admitted, she positioned herself as the most important woman in my life. This pattern of behavior extended back to Liam's adolescence when Aunt Beatrice had successfully interfered with several of his high school relationships through similar tactics of manipulation and sabotage. Our marriage had simply been her most ambitious target, the relationship that posed the greatest threat to her position in his life. Understanding Aunt Beatrice's long-term pattern of manipulation helped Liam process his guilt about believing her accusations against me. He hadn't been weak or gullible. He had been conditioned over decades to trust her judgment and accept her version of events. Breaking free from that conditioning required conscious effort and therapeutic support. Recognizing manipulation doesn't make you immune to it, Dr. Reed assured him, especially when it comes from someone you've been taught to trust since childhood. The important thing is learning to identify the pattern so you can protect yourself and your family in the future. As our marriage continued to strengthen, we made the decision to relocate to a different neighborhood. The apartment that had been our sanctuary for 5 years now carried too many negative associations with Aunt Beatrice's manipulation and the neighbors' gossip. We wanted a fresh start, somewhere we could build new relationships based on honesty and mutual respect. The process of selling our apartment and finding a new home became a positive project that brought Liam and me closer together. We spent weekends touring properties, discussing our priorities and dreams for our family's future. The children were initially resistant to leaving their familiar neighborhood, but they gradually became excited about the adventure of exploring new areas and potentially making new friends. We found the perfect house in a family-friendly community about 20 minutes from our old apartment, far enough to feel like a fresh start, but close enough to maintain the children's school enrollment and my job at the design studio. The house itself was smaller than our previous home, but had a more open floor plan that encouraged family interaction and communication. I like that there's no place to hide, Liam commented as we walked through the empty rooms after closing on the property. No separate home office where I can isolate myself. No formal living room where we pretend to entertain people we don't really like. The move represented more than just a change of address. It was a symbolic, fresh start for our family. We painted rooms together, arranged furniture to encourage conversation and connection, and established new routines that prioritized family time and open communication. One of the most significant changes we made was implementing a policy of complete transparency about outside influences on our marriage. If either of us received concerning information about the other from family members, friends, or colleagues, we agreed to discuss it immediately rather than allowing doubt and suspicion to build. No more secrets. No more taking other people's word over each other's, Liam said as we established our new ground rules. If someone has something to say about our marriage, they can say it to both of us together. This policy was tested several months after our move when Liam's mother called to express concerns about our decision to cut Aunt Beatrice out of our lives. She had been receiving Aunt Beatrice's version of events, which painted her as the victim of my jealousy and manipulation. "Your mother wants to have dinner with us," Liam told me after hanging up the phone. "She thinks we're being too harsh with Aunt Beatrice and that family should forgive family." "What did you tell her?" I asked. "I told her that we'd be happy to have dinner, but that we'd be bringing the photographic evidence of Aunt Beatrice's affair and a complete timeline of her manipulation. I said if she wanted to discuss family forgiveness, she needed to understand exactly what she was asking us to forgive." Liam's mother declined the dinner invitation after that conversation, apparently realizing that she didn't actually want to confront the evidence of her daughter's behavior. It was a disappointing but not surprising response that confirmed our decision to maintain boundaries with family members who chose to enable Aunt Beatrice's manipulation rather than hold her accountable. The children adapted well to our new neighborhood and the changes in our family dynamics. Without the constant undercurrent of tension that had characterized our home during Aunt Beatrice's campaign against me, they seemed more relaxed and secure. Their grades improved. They made new friends easily, and they began participating in activities they had shown interest in, but hadn't pursued during the chaos of the previous months. "Mom, I like it better here," Maya confided one evening as I was tucking her into bed. "Our old apartment always felt like someone was mad about something." Her observation was startlingly accurate. Aunt Beatrice's manipulation had created an atmosphere of constant low-level conflict in our home, with tensions that the children had absorbed even though they didn't understand the source. Removing that toxic influence had allowed our family dynamic to return to something healthier and more stable. As our first year in the new house drew to a close, Liam and I reflected on how much our relationship had changed and grown through the crisis Aunt Beatrice had created. We were more intentional about our communication, more protective of our privacy as a couple, and more committed to maintaining the trust we had worked so hard to rebuild. "I know this sounds strange," Liam said during one of our evening conversations on our new back porch, "but I'm almost grateful for what happened with Aunt Beatrice." "Grateful?" I asked, surprised by his choice of words. "Not grateful for the pain she caused or the damage she did," Liam clarified, "but grateful that we were forced to examine our marriage and fix the problems that made us vulnerable to her manipulation. We're stronger now than we were before this happened." I considered his words, thinking about the ways our relationship had indeed improved through the process of rebuilding trust and intimacy. We talked more openly, spent more intentional time together, and had developed strategies for handling conflict and outside pressure that we hadn't possessed before. She thought she was destroying us, I realized, but she actually made us stronger. "The best revenge," Liam agreed with a smile. Our revenge against Aunt Beatrice wasn't elaborate or dramatic. It was simply living well and being happy together. Every day that our marriage thrived and our family prospered was evidence that her manipulation had ultimately failed. Every moment of genuine intimacy and trust between Liam and me was proof that love and honesty could overcome deception and betrayal. Aunt Beatrice had invested months of effort in trying to destroy our marriage, sacrificing her own integrity and relationships in pursuit of a goal that had been doomed from the start. She had underestimated the strength of our foundation and overestimated her own ability to manipulate people indefinitely without consequences. The final confirmation of her failure came 2 years after our confrontation when we received word through mutual acquaintances that Aunt Beatrice had moved to another state, apparently unable to rebuild her reputation and career after the scandal. She had lost her boyfriend, damaged her relationship with her brother permanently, destroyed her professional standing, and been forced to start over completely in an unfamiliar place. "Do you ever feel sorry for her?" I asked Liam when we heard about her relocation. Sometimes, he admitted. She's my sister, and I hate that things ended this way. But I can't feel sorry for someone who refuses to take responsibility for their own choices. She created this situation through her own actions, and she chose to continue lying even after she was caught. What would it take for you to consider reconciliation? Liam thought for a long moment before answering. Genuine remorse, and a complete acknowledgement of what she did wrong. Not just an apology for getting caught, but a real understanding of how her actions affected everyone involved. And honestly, I don't think she's capable of that level of self-reflection. As time passed, the acute pain of Aunt Beatrice's betrayal faded into a more distant awareness of lessons learned and boundaries established. Our marriage continued to strengthen. Our children thrived in their new environment, and our family developed new traditions and connections that had nothing to do with the toxic dynamics Aunt Beatrice had created. The security cameras that had captured the evidence of Aunt Beatrice's affair remained installed at our new house, but they served a different purpose now. Instead of gathering evidence of betrayal, they provided genuine security and peace of mind for our family. The irony wasn't lost on me that the same technology Aunt Beatrice had underestimated in her arrogance had become a symbol of the protection and transparency that now characterized our home. One evening, as I was reviewing the day's camera footage to check on a package delivery, I reflected on how different my relationship with surveillance had become. What had once been a desperate attempt to document the truth in the face of lies was now simply a practical tool for managing household security. The paranoia and hypervigilance that had characterized the worst months of Aunt Beatrice's manipulation had been replaced by a calm confidence in our family's stability. "What are you thinking about?" Liam asked, finding me at the kitchen table with my laptop open to the security system interface. "How far we've come," I replied, closing the laptop and turning to face him. "How different everything feels now." "Different how?" "Peaceful," I said, realizing it was the perfect word to describe our current life. For the first time in years, our home feels genuinely peaceful. Liam pulled me into his arms, and I marveled at how natural and comfortable the gesture felt. The physical intimacy that had been strained during Aunt Beatrice's campaign against us had returned stronger than before, built on a foundation of renewed trust and mutual respect. "I love you," Liam said simply. Words that carried more weight now, because of everything we had survived together. "I love you too," I replied, meaning it with a depth and certainty that had been tested by fire and emerged unshaken. Our story had become one of redemption and renewal, rather than destruction and betrayal. Aunt Beatrice had intended to write an ending where Liam and I were separated, where trust was broken beyond repair, where her manipulation achieved its ultimate goal. Instead, she had written herself out of our story entirely, leaving behind a stronger marriage and a more resilient family than she had found. The woman who had tried to destroy our love had inadvertently shown us how precious and worth fighting for it really was. In trying to break us apart, she had taught us how to hold each other closer. In attempting to poison our trust, she had shown us the value of transparency and honesty. In seeking to manipulate our family dynamics, she had helped us establish healthier boundaries and communication patterns. As I looked around our peaceful home, filled with the sounds of our children playing and our quiet conversations about daily life and future dreams, I realized that Aunt Beatrice's ultimate failure had been in misunderstanding the true nature of love and commitment. She had assumed that marriage was fragile enough to be destroyed by outside interference, that trust could be permanently broken by clever manipulation, that family bonds were weak enough to be severed by lies and accusations. What she had discovered, instead, was that genuine love, built on years of shared experience and mutual respect, could weather storms that would destroy relationships based on less solid foundations. She had learned that trust, once broken and then consciously rebuilt, could become stronger than trust that had never been tested. She had found that families who chose to protect and support each other could overcome even the most sophisticated attempts at manipulation and control. The security cameras had revealed more than just Aunt Beatrice's affair. They had exposed the difference between destructive deception and protective truth-telling. The evidence we had gathered hadn't been used to hurt innocent people or advance selfish agendas. It had been used to protect our family and restore honesty to our relationships. In the end, the cameras had shown us exactly what we needed to see. That reality was more powerful than manipulation, that truth was stronger than lies, and that love backed by evidence and commitment could overcome even the most calculated attempts at destruction. Aunt Beatrice had gambled everything on her ability to rewrite our story according to her desires. But she had underestimated the power of people who refused to let their narrative be controlled by someone else's manipulation. We had taken back control of our own story, and we were writing an ending based on love, truth, and the unshakable foundation of a marriage that had been tested and proven strong enough to survive anything.